Sure. Can I ask you a quick question really quickly? Can I ask you a question? Any extra details? We did just get the independent autopsy results today. Anything?
A reporter asked Sheriff John Ledbetter a direct question on Wednesday, hours after the independent autopsy findings became public. His answer was one word long. I want to sit with that for a second before we go any further, because a one-word answer from a sheriff on the exact day new medical evidence broke in his own case isn't just a small detail. It's the whole story of this update in miniature. For 2.5 weeks, this investigation has moved between two very different registers. Confident public statements early on, then something closer to total silence once the evidence got complicated. Wednesday was the day those two registers collided, on camera in a parking lot. But here's what almost nobody caught in the moment. Buried inside that same short exchange, twice, unprompted, Ledbetter told the reporter to go check with the district attorney's office instead. Not his own department, not the coroner, the DA. That's strange. Say the sentence out loud and it doesn't sit right. A sheriff with nothing left to say, pointing specifically at a different office entirely. Stay with us, because that redirect wasn't a brush-off. It was, whether he meant it to be or not, an accurate description of where this case has already quietly moved, a fact confirmed separately, hours later, by the family's own attorney. We're going to walk through exactly how Wednesday happened, what broke in Chicago that morning, what broke down in that parking lot that afternoon, and why one sheriff's redirect to one office might be the most honest thing he said all day, even though he never meant it as an answer.
I called the Mississippi medical examiner, the Jackson County coroner, and even went to the sheriff's office, but each one of them said,
And everything else should be referenced to the district attorney's office.
anything to believe that it's foul play?
You already know the broad strokes. Horn Island, the 4th of July, a boat trip that ended with everyone else coming home and Nolan not. You know Sheriff Ledbetter's early framing. No indication of a crime, an accidental drowning, before a single autopsy had even been performed. You know the family didn't trust that framing. You know that's why they sent Nolan's body to Washington, D.C. for a second look, a look nobody in Mississippi controlled. Wednesday, that second look finally spoke. Attorney Ben Crump stood at a podium at the NAACP's National Convention and read from the report himself. Not a press release, not a summary, the actual language of the pathologist. The pathologist's name is Dr. Roger Mitchell, board certified, former chief medical examiner for the District of Columbia, currently the president of the National Medical Association, the oldest organization of black physicians in the country. This is not a fringe credential. This is someone whose entire career has been reading bodies for a living. Mitchell performed the exam on July 10th, 6 days after Nolan disappeared, 4 days after his body was recovered. And that gap, that specific gap, is going to matter more than almost anything else in this story. Hold on to it. Here's what Crump read. No fractures, no deep tissue injuries, no lacerations to the skin, no broken bones anywhere Mitchell could examine. And then, the discoloration, a focal area of red discoloration, deep in the soft tissue at the back of the head, in the occipital region, reported at roughly 12 inches by 8. Mitchell would not say what caused it. He couldn't. Not because he was hiding something, because the body had already decomposed to a point where the normal tools a pathologist relies on, bruising patterns on the skin, the texture of underlying tissue, simply weren't reliable anymore. Discoloration like that can come from actual trauma. It can also come from something far less dramatic. Blood settling after death, decomposition changing the color of muscle tissue on its own. Two very different explanations. One visible finding. No way, from this exam alone, to tell them apart. So Mitchell wrote the sentence that's now defining this entire news cycle. He could not rule out that non-accidental factors contributed to or caused Nolan's death. That's not an accusation. Read it again slowly, and you'll hear what it actually is. An honest admission of a limit. He's not saying it was foul play. He's saying he can't say it wasn't. Those are two very different sentences, and this case has already shown us what happens when people collapse them into one. Here's where it gets more complicated and where your patience is going to matter, because the details here are the whole ballgame. When Mitchell received Nolan's body, it was already missing something. A portion of the internal structures of his neck, including his trachea, had been removed during the first autopsy, the official one, performed by the state on the morning of July 7th. Removed and kept. Crump was careful to say this isn't inherently sinister. Retaining tissue for further examination is, in his own words, reading from the report, common forensic pathology practice. Pathologists do it. Sometimes there's a reason. Sometimes there isn't one yet. But common practice or not, it left a hole in what Mitchell could actually assess. If someone is manually strangled, the injuries typically concentrate at the front of the neck, not the back. That's exactly the piece of anatomy Mitchell never got to look at, which means the single finding capable of most directly answering the foul play question wasn't available to the doctor asking it. There's more missing, too. No toxicology, not because Mitchell chose to skip it, because toxicology testing requires specific facilities and specific time, and the independent exam simply didn't include it. Whatever alcohol, whatever else may or may not have been in Nolan's system that night, that answer sits entirely with the state. Nowhere else. And underneath all of it sits the plainest limitation of all. Mitchell said, in his own report, that he does not know the condition Nolan was in before he entered the water. Conscious, unconscious, whether he went in on his own or didn't. He called that distinction the crux of the entire matter, the single most important unresolved question standing between an undetermined finding and an actual answer, undetermined. That's the official word for both cause and manner of death as of Wednesday. Not accident, not homicide. Undetermined, pending further investigation. Crump's own phrase for it, standing at that podium, this is only another piece of the puzzle. More questions than answers. Said by the family's own attorney about the family's own hired doctor's own report. That matters. Sit with that too. Because Mitchell wasn't the only credentialed voice weighing in this week. Once the findings went public, other forensic pathologists, with no connection to this case, no connection to the family, no connection to Mississippi at all, started reacting. And they didn't all land in the same place. Dr. Judy Melinek, a board-certified forensic pathologist who spent years at the New York City Medical Examiner's office, told ABC News something worth hearing in full. That the fact Mitchell wouldn't commit to a cause for the discoloration is itself a signal that the pathologist himself isn't confident it's trauma. Discoloration, she said, can come from a lot of things, especially in a decomposed body, where it can simply be a consequence of decomposition working its way through the tissue. Nothing more sinister than time and heat and water doing what they do to any body left unrecovered for days. Then there's Dr. Kendall Von Crowns, the chief medical examiner in Tarrant County, Texas, also with zero ties to this case. His read split the difference in a way that's honestly more useful than either extreme. The discoloration, he said, could represent decompositional changes in the muscle, or it could be from blunt force injury to the back of the head and neck. He didn't pick one. He said both remain live possibilities, and that's simply where the evidence currently sits. A third pathologist, Dr. Priya Banerjee, made a point that's easy to miss but genuinely reframes this whole story. Second autopsies, she said, carry an inherent limitation, not because the doctor performing them is any less skilled, but because of everything the body has already been through by the time a second examiner gets access to it. Organs already removed, tissue already retained elsewhere. Days of decomposition. Mitchell simply couldn't undo, no matter how thorough his exam was. Put those three together, and you get something more honest than any single headline could offer. Real trained professionals, reading the exact same limited report, landing in genuinely different places, not because any of them is wrong, but because the evidence itself hasn't decided yet. That's not spin. That's what undetermined actually looks like from the inside.
We to have the medical examiner in Mississippi allow him to review the throat. That's why he said his autopsy is undetermined pending investigation. Remember, it's about transparency. This is so important that we continue to talk about Nolan Wells and what happened to him, and that we get attention on him, because in getting attention on him, it brings attention, Cliff Jones, to other cases that are not getting their attention as of yet. But I'm so grateful to Christine and Elmer, because they said whatever we can do, not only to help our son, but to help these other young black boys who was killed the July 4th holiday.
Now, back to Wednesday afternoon. Back to the moment that started this video. Because while all of that was unfolding in Chicago, 600 miles away, Sheriff Ledbetter was walking to his car in Mississippi, and a reporter from a New Orleans station was waiting for him. She'd been trying to get an interview for 2 weeks, told back on July 8th that he was tied up in meetings, told eventually that he simply wasn't coming out to speak with her at all. July 8th. Mark that date because it's not a random one. It's the last day his office posted anything publicly about this case. Nearly 2 weeks of silence from the agency actually running this investigation, broken only by findings that came from Washington, D.C., not from him. So she asked him directly, "Now that the independent autopsy is public, will your office be releasing any more details?" No, not at this time. She asked if that meant his office was done answering questions about this case altogether. He pushed back on how she'd framed it, said he wasn't refusing, just confirming. Fine, but the confirmation itself was the answer. "We're actively investigating. That's all we're saying." Then she brought up the one thing that actually mattered. Nolan's mother had said publicly, weeks earlier, that the sheriff's office told her there was no foul play, before any exam had even happened. "Has anything changed since then?" she asked. "Now that new findings exist?" He didn't answer it. Not really. He repeated that it's still an active, ongoing investigation, said the state's own report hasn't been released yet. True, as far as it goes. And then, twice, unprompted both times, he told her to check with the district attorney's office instead. Said that's not something his own office handles. Called it, in a phrase that honestly sounds like he was reaching for more formal language and it came out sideways. Something about an ethics statement. Whatever he actually meant by those 3 words, it's not worth overreading. People misspeak on camera, especially when they're trying to say as little as possible without technically refusing to speak at all. But the redirect itself, pointing specifically and repeatedly at the DA's office, that part wasn't a slip. And it's the part that's about to matter a lot more than it seemed to in that moment. Before we get to why that redirect matters, you need the rest of what's swirling around this case right now, because none of it exists in isolation. Reverend Al Sharpton and Tyler Perry have each separately put up $50,000, $100,000 combined, for information leading to an arrest and conviction in Nolan's death. That's not a small gesture. That's 2 prominent public figures putting real money behind the belief that this isn't over, and that someone out there may know more than they've said. Christine Wansley, Nolan's mother, has also alleged that messages were deleted from her son's phone sometime after his body was found. That's her claim. Not yet an independently confirmed fact, and it's important to hold it that way. But it's part of why Crump's legal team is now working directly with the local prosecutor to examine that phone themselves. There's also video, obtained by TMZ from Horn Island, appearing to show a young black man in swim trunks, possibly the last footage of Nolan alive. Authorities haven't confirmed that identification. It's being reviewed, not treated as settled. And underneath all of it, the racial context this case has carried since day one hasn't gone anywhere. Nolan was the only black teenager in a mostly white friend group in a town that's roughly 79% white. Nobody involved in this story needs that spelled out for them at this point. You already know it's part of why this case has drawn national attention instead of staying a local story. Here's where it comes together, because separately, not in that parking lot, not from the sheriff at all, Crump has confirmed something that hasn't gotten nearly the attention it deserves. The local prosecuting attorney has already agreed to take this case to a grand jury once the investigation is complete. That conversation reportedly happened last week. Quietly, no press conference, no release. Think about what that actually means. Sitting next to what Ledbetter said in that parking lot, he wasn't dodging into a void when he told that reporter to go talk to the district attorney's office. He was, whether deliberately or not, pointing her at the office where this case has already started to move. Not confirmed charges, not an indictment, nothing that dramatic. Yet. But a procedural step that puts this firmly on a track toward a grand jury, running in parallel with everything else, while the public conversation stayed fixed entirely on the sheriff and his silence. That's the actual turn this week produced. Not a confession, not new evidence pointing at a specific person or a specific crime. A quiet acknowledgement that this case has already outgrown a sheriff's department's jurisdiction, whether or not anyone announced it that way.
Any more details concerning the case? The last thing I saw on your social media was on July 8th, the same day. So any extra details, because we did just get the independent autopsy results today. Anything that you would give us?
None at this time.
Okay, so y'all are no longer answering questions about the case?
Yeah. I know you're trying to get some edited footage, but
No, I'm just asking. I'm just confirming.
That's all we're saying. We're actively investigating.
Crump's team is also now working alongside that same prosecutor to examine Nolan's phone directly, the one his mother says had messages removed from it. That's not something a family's private legal team can typically do without some level of cooperation from the office actually running point on the investigation, which tells you the same thing from a different angle. Whatever is happening behind the scenes, it's happening with more coordination between the family's side and the prosecution than the public silence from the sheriff's office would ever suggest. So when Ledbetter said, twice, go talk to the DA, he wasn't wrong. He also wasn't volunteering the full picture of why that redirect actually mattered. Both of those things are true at once, and that's worth sitting with instead of collapsing into a simpler story than what actually happened. Now, the part we need to be honest about, because this case has punished everyone who's tried to skip it. Nobody has confirmed foul play. Not Mitchell, not Melinek, not Von Crowns, not Crump himself, who stood at that podium and called this only another piece of the puzzle, not a conclusion. The official word, from the family's own hired pathologist, is undetermined. That word means exactly what it says. Nobody has confirmed an accidental drowning either. That was the state's early framing, and it's the framing this entire case has spent 2.5 weeks pushing back against, precisely because it arrived before any medical evidence existed to support it. Here's everything still outstanding, in one place. The state's own autopsy report, still not released, more than 2 weeks after it was performed. The toxicology results, still pending, and likely still weeks away, given how that testing works. The retained neck and throat tissue, still sitting wherever the state medical examiner's office is keeping it, unexamined by the one pathologist who's actually spoken publicly about what it might show. And now, a grand jury process that's apparently already been agreed to, with no public timeline attached to it at all. 4 separate things. 4 separate offices in some cases. All of them capable of changing this story significantly the moment any one of them actually surfaces. This video isn't the ending. It can't be. The case itself hasn't reached one. What it is the most complete picture that currently exists of 2 things happening at once. A family finally getting a concrete physical detail about their son's body after weeks of nothing. And a sheriff's office whose silence, on the one day it mattered most, turned out to be pointing, accurately, if not exactly honestly, at a process that had already quietly begun without a single public announcement. We'll be back the moment any of those 4 things change. The state's report, the toxicology, the retained tissue, or the grand jury. If you want to be here when that happens, subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss it the moment it drops.